Diablo 2 maps have some weird correlations between acts. For example, this map has Stony Field to the bottom left of Cold Plains. All seats with this connection will always have the exit from Lower Kurast on the right side and the next exit on the left side. You probably already knew this one, but did you know that it also means that the town in Act 4 will always be connected to the center of the top left border with outer steps? And Frigid Highlands in Act 5 will always go towards the top right. Okay, the last two are just useless trivia, but here's a little known but pretty useful connection. The exit from Black Marsh will always be to the top left here. And since Bloodmoor was on the top right of Cold Plains, we can also tell that Black Marsh is towards the bottom left of Darkwood. And that's weird, right? If it's random, we shouldn't be able to tell. And yet one connection in Act 1 tells us something about all other acts except Act 2. Here's a different connection in Act 2. The exit from Rocky Waste being in this corner and going to top right means that there's a 92% probability that you have to walk through Great Marsh in the jungle. Here's the seed I'm using, and the maps are rendered using my web app from my last video. The link is in the description. So how does that work? And can we find more of these connections? When the game loads an act, it runs some hard-coded logic to determine some of the high-level layouts for the maps. Let's take a look at the classic Stony Field and Lower Kurast correlation. In Act 1, the first random thing you notice is the exit direction from town, but you probably know that not all directions are equally likely here. That's already weird if map generation starts from here. Well, the thing is, it doesn't start in town. It starts in Stony Field and places it at a fixed location as an empty square. The exact shapes and placements of objects within a level are only determined once you actually load the level itself. For now, we are only looking at the high-level placements of these areas. First step, pick where to attach Cold Plains. It calls the RNG to get this number. But we need a direction, so divide it by 4 and take the remainder, also known as taking the number mod 4 or just looking at the lowest 2 bits. Numbers map to directions like this. If we load Act 3, the very first thing it does is another RNG call. But it can't do that from the current state because you can load the acts in any order, so it instead resets the RNG and starts fresh. Here it starts with a coin flip to place the connections between the Kurast areas. Since the RNG was just reset, we get the exact same number. If it's even, the exit is placed towards the right. If it's odd, towards the left. The next exit is just placed on the opposite side. And that's it. We already know the number mod 4 from Act 1, and since 2 divides 4, that also tells us the number mod 2. Or in other words, when Cold Plains is to the top right or bottom left of Stony Field, then the first RNG result is an even number. If it's top left or bottom right, it's an odd number. And that's all there is to it. The same happens in Act 4. It starts by flipping a coin to decide whether to place the town at the center or towards the left edge. And in Act 5, that coin flip decides the orientation of Frigid Highlands. What about Act 2? The very first RNG call decides which tomb is the right one. That's very interesting. But unfortunately it's also completely useless because there are 7 tombs. 7 and 4 are co-prime, so we get absolutely no information whatsoever here. If the game had 8 tombs instead, we could narrow it down to 2 of them. With 7, we get absolutely nothing. But we get another piece of information about Act 1. For some reason the game resets the RNG before building the second outdoor area, even though both are loaded in the beginning. Here it starts by placing Monastery Gate as a fixed position and then attaching Tamor Highlands to the bottom left. The first roll decides where to attach Black Marsh. The RNG gives us the same number, so it goes to the top right, but that's blocked. Instead it picks the next free spot in clockwise direction, bottom right. For all other directions, the layout of these 2 areas is exactly the same as Stony Field and Cold Plains. And yes, that fallback implies that the layout seen here shows up twice as often as the other layouts. Now if we continue running the algorithm, the next step here is attaching Darkwood. Stepping the RNG again gives us a completely new number, but taking mod 4 it's another 2, so Darkwood is to the top right. And in the first area the same happened to determine the location of Bloodmoor, so that's also to the top right. As you go deeper it starts to get messy. Whenever there's a collision the game retries with the next position, and if none are valid, then it retries the next position on the previous step as well. If Bloodmoor was to the top left here, we couldn't tell if it spawned there, or if it tried the same direction as Stony Field first. So Darkwood to Black Marsh could be top right or bottom left, with no way to tell. But that's the only ambiguous case here. The other 11 possible layouts for the areas before Underground Passage fully determine the layouts for the areas after. Here's the full table if you want to memorize it. Bloodmoor is the first area that's not a square, and it attaches its short edge to Cold Plains. The next RNG call determines if it goes to the left or right side. The real mess starts when it places the rogue camp. For some reason it uses 2 RNG calls, one mod 4 to determine the direction and another one mod 2 for the position along the edge. There are only 3 valid town positions, as it always places town on the opposite end of cold plains. There's a large lookup table in the code to determine valid positions. For example, take a look at this layout. The town isn't allowed to spawn on the opposite short edge here. The river to the bottom right of the town would crash into cold plains, so that position is banned. But if Bloodmoor was attached to the other position along the same edge of cold plains, it would be a valid layout. Overall, that means the town exit direction doesn't help much for these connections. About half the seeds have the town exit going towards the bottom right, because that placement is almost always valid. Top right town exits are very rare, only 7.8% of seeds have these. But back to connections across acts. We are looking for things that are generated at the same offset in the RNG stream. What does that algorithm look like for other acts? Act 2 rolls the fake tomb next. There's always one wrong tomb that's larger than the others. And yes, that's mod 7 again, giving us nothing. What happens if the fake tomb and the real tomb are the same? It re-rolls them, both of them. That is really annoying because it introduces a random offset in 14% of seeds that we can't see. The next rolls are coin flip for town exit, followed by exits from the outdoor areas starting in Rocky Waste. Each one is a mod 8 roll for the 8 possible attachment points each area has. Again, if anything collides, it backtracks. Next up, this mess. The code is as messy as the area it generates. It alternates between picking an area to work on and performing an action on it. It starts with a single area, so does a mod 1 roll. Yeah, that does nothing. Then a mod 5 roll to pick what to do. That gives us nothing anyways. But here's an interesting step, a mod 2 roll that determines whether Flare Jungle is adjacent to Spider Forest. The catch is, adjacent doesn't mean there's a walkable path, but in about 95% of cases, adjacent means walkable. Unfortunately, corresponding roll in Act 1 is the town direction, and with all the backtracking going on there, we don't have much info. But for Act 2 it's the exit in Rocky Waste. Town blocks 2 of them, so if on the backup spot we don't know much. But for these other spots we can make a good guess, assuming the tomb position didn't collide earlier. So it's not 100% correlated, but it works in most cases. The following rolls in Act 3 get really messy with a lot of backtracking as it adds connections and runs a lot of custom validation code. So no, we can't get much here. Act 4 is interesting again. There are only 2 more rolls, and those are just directions for the next 2 areas. A trivial fact first, Plains of Despair has a 50% probability of being towards the top right, and only a 25% probability for the other 2 directions. That's just because if it picks top left, it always falls back to the top right. Or more generally, Act 4 tends to turn left because the fallback goes clockwise and generation starts in town. Act 1 tends to turn right because generation goes backwards from Stony Field. And you can usually determine the first exit from just Act 1. But the only easy and direct connection is cold plains being toward the bottom left always implies that Plains of Despair is to the top right. For most of the other directions a bit more nuanced, some cold plains to Stony Field directions will still lead to a coin flip. Here's the full table if you want to memorize it. Act 5 is pretty useless, we just get the orientations of all the outdoor areas. So what about dungeons? They can also be loaded in any order, so it must reset the RNG again for each one. But that would mean dungeons like Tower that just have multiple identical levels would all look the same, and that's clearly not the case. So what's happening here is that the level ID gets mixed into the seed, and that completely destroys this approach beyond the first roll. So does any dungeon decide anything interesting in the first roll? That's a story for another time, but as far as I can tell there isn't anything we can do here. But since you're gonna ask about it anyways, no, you can't easily solve Arcane Sanctuary like this. Summoner position is decided on the 63rd RNG call. Given a seed you can easily calculate it without running any game code, but you can't get it without also getting the full seed. But now that I understand the game internals much better, I can improve my seed brute forcing tool significantly. I'll definitely follow up on that. Consider subscribing if you don't want to miss that. And if you haven't watched my last video about brute forcing seeds, you can watch that one next.